Hello and welcome to the Arc Woman podcast. This is an exploration of womankind. Here we discuss what it is to be a woman in the modern world while utilizing ancient and modern modalities in tandem to create a bounty of health for the body, mind and spirit. G'day everyone and welcome back to the pod. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which this podcast is being recorded across Lutruwita, Tasmania, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and future. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Rebecca Mackenzie-Proctor, a fertility specialist and gynaecologist at Stellar Fertility in Melbourne and a newly appointed lecturer at the University of New South Wales. She has over a decade of experience with subspecialist training in reproductive endocrinology and infertility. She combines scientific rigor with a deeply patient-centered approach. We spoke about all things IVF and modern fertility care, from navigating complex diagnoses to understanding treatment options, and how a holistic view of reproductive health can support people on their path to parenthood. Let's get into it. Cool. All right. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for coming on today. I really appreciate your time. Do you mind just starting out and explaining what got you into medical school? What got you into learning about physiology and specializing in IVF and being a female-focused health practitioner and doctor?
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's such a special opportunity to be here and be able to talk to other people about the process and what I do and how I got here. And hopefully some people will feel some help with what I say today. But in answer to your question, how did I get here? What made me go into medical school? I really always wanted to help people. And I know it sounds kind of a bit trite, but as a kid, I had the biggest backpack in the school. I'd turn up to school with everything in my bag to help everybody. So if anyone had a problem, I had it in my bag, and I always was walking around helping people from a younger age. But I kind of got a bit excited about life in between times, and I enjoyed music. I was in a band. I wanted to be a fashion designer. I didn't really want to be at school that much in my second 3 years. And so I didn't go straight to medical school. I traveled the world. I then went and explored different cultures and different environments and finally thought, okay, no, she is what I always wanted to do, and went back to my roots. But because I'd already missed the sort of entry to medical school, I did a degree, which meant that I had to actually work twice as hard. So I had to get straight A's or A pluses all throughout my degree, as opposed to maybe just 1 year of pre-medical school. So that degree was physiology. So I did physiology. I actually did 3 different majors. I changed my major each year, which meant I had to study twice as much each year too. But that's exciting. So I got to learn so much more stuff. So I started off doing sports physiology, cardiology. Then I moved on to psychology, neuroscience, physiology of neuroscience, physiology of the heart, everything else but fertility, actually. And then through medical school, I really missed physiology. I found that medical school was a little bit behind with the knowledge that I'd learned from my degree, because it was really cutting edge science. And by the time I found women's health, from a holistic point of view, I felt that was the best thing to be doing. I could do all aspects of surgery, scanning, looking after women, and also medicine. And it's an area of positivity. Bringing life into the world is positive. It's not negative. You're not saying, oh, I've had a stroke, and so you've got to look after the symptoms of it, but you actually never ever get better. Whereas with women's health, there's lots of times where you can improve people's lifetime and outcome. And at this point in time, people are the most receptive to change. And I was really sick of telling people, oh, well, if you need to stop smoking to stop your lung conditions. Whereas with fertility or with women's health, you can change so much of your future by changing your environment and changing your day-to-day health. So I really found that really positive. And then what brought me into fertility is that I actually missed the science. So I got through medicals, I got through O&G training, obstetrics and gynecology training, and realized actually I still missed that really base physiology. And with fertility, I get to have everything. It's science and action. Every day, I'm able to help patients manipulate hormones to try to get them a better outcome. And I'm actually seeing the changes in their physiology day to day. And having had that background after all that earlier study, it was not wasted, because now I get to use it in my day-to-day job. And then the 3 years extra study on top of that, the CREI specialist fertility training, meant that I then got to enhance my knowledge, like taking steroids on my knowledge. It's just been such the best way of being able to utilize everything that I've learned to help patients. And along the side journey of that, I've always valued the importance of travel and the importance of understanding other people's culture. And by practicing the way that I get to practice, I can utilize and help women think about what are our roots of being a woman? What are our roots of our environment? How do we cycle based on the different cycles of the moon, all those sorts of things that we're way way back when. What do the Indian people do? What do the Chinese people do? What do every different culture has a different sort of focus. And I think through my love of travel and my love of human beings, I've gathered a lot of information that I can now use in this environment. So I just feel like the luckiest woman in the world that I get to do this job. And then having kids, it's even better. I was like, I have these beautiful children that I just love so much. And every day I put them to bed, I think, gosh, I'm lucky. And this is why I go to work the next day, is to give other people this joy if that's what they want. And so that's what motivates me and keeps me going.
Wow, what a beautiful interaction. That's, incredible. And I love what you said about bringing life into the world is a positive and joyous thing. And we need to view it as that. And we really need to foster that connection. And it's really unique to hear that you kind of had a life before med school. Every other doctor I've spoken to, they were like, right, I got triple A's and I went straight from high school into pre-med, and then I went into med, and then I specialized, and I was done and dusted by the time I was 30. And then they start traveling, and then they have these holistic experiences. And how you speak about IVF and how we've spoken previously, you can absolutely tell that your life experiences and also the amount of study that you've done have really imbued how you view IVF and fertility as this holistic, joyous space that we should be excited about. And I think that's one of the many reasons I wanted to have you on today. So we're talking about IVF. What is IVF? Do you mind explaining what this is just at the outset?
So IVF is a very technical, very scientific-based approach to helping people be able to conceive. It involves approximately about a 2-week period of intensive monitoring and medications. So patients will use injections to stimulate their ovaries to grow little follicles. And within those follicles, we hope that there are eggs. We do a few scans in that cycle, maybe 2, sometimes 3 scans, to see that the patient is responding the way we'd expect. And then when they look like their follicles are big enough and we expect there to be eggs inside of them, we will arrange to have an egg collection, which is usually done under some form of anesthetic, and depends on where you are in the country, in the world, how this is done. So we collect the eggs into some fluid that is looked under the microscope by the scientists. Those eggs are then get a chance to meet the sperm. So they have a date night after the egg collection day, and it's either injected by a process called ICSI, or they are allowed to fertilize overnight. And the next day, the scientists will be able to see how well the fertility with the fertilization has occurred. And then we watch the embryos grow and plan to put them back in the body or freeze them as needed. So it's a way of enhancing people's fertility, or also for those that don't have some of the necessary machinery for getting pregnant, it allows them to be able to have a baby by the use of science.
Mm-hmm. I love how you said date night. You must be so excited, in the afternoon, or sometimes, late evening, as doctors often work overtime, putting them back in the petri dish. Okay, I'm going to go to home, going to go see my kids, can't wait to get to work and see what's happened in the morning and see what's happened to this petri dish and see if we have any embryos. Like, I love how you're talking about that. It's actually quite exciting. But IVF, as you've just explained it, sounds pretty invasive. So if I'm correct, the medication you're giving to women at the start of their cycle is going to increase FSH, or it also is FSH itself. And that's designed to increase the amount of follicles that are matured, so you can take them out and you can put them in a petri dish. Is that correct?
So it's actually, we give patients FSH. So FSH stands for follicle stimulating hormone. And that stimulates the follicles to develop. And in the development of a follicle, estrogen level is increased. So it's not increasing the FSH, it's increasing the estrogen. And as the estrogen level is increasing, that is the normal trigger response for ovulation to occur. What usually happens is that a follicle, only one becomes the dominant follicle and all the rest die. So in a month cycle, patients may have 10 to 100 little follicles trying to become the one that's going to ovulate. Usually only one makes it through and the rest die. And so you're always getting follicles growing and dying, regardless if you're on the pill, regardless if you actually ovulate. This process is constantly happening. So you're constantly losing eggs. But what IVF is doing is stopping those eggs or the follicles from deteriorating and allowing the ones that were going to be there to keep going. So we have to use a second medication to trick the brain from knowing that this estrogen level is above the physiological expected level. And then we also then have to trigger the ovulation sort of process ourselves, because we've basically taken over the brain's ability to do the natural fertility process. So yes, it's very intense, because we are giving the body higher levels of hormone than they would normally expect to have in a natural cycle.
Okay, so this is quite an intense process, and it is interesting because IVF and IUI, we'll talk about all of the, and egg freezing as well. This is just kind of part and parcel with females and like women nowadays, and especially modern women. But I think we forget how intensive it is and how invasive it can be, because we haven't even spoken about how you take the ovums out, which is you put like a needle up through the cervix and into the fallopian tubes. Is that correct? And that's where you extract. Oh no, how do you take it out? I'm incorrect.
Almost, but yes, almost, but not quite. So the first part's correct. We use an ultrasound guided probe. So similar to what you have a vaginal scan. So it's invasive in itself for a lot of people. It has a needle on the end that goes, it's guided through the ultrasound scan, and that actually goes into the ovary, the fluid in the ovary itself, and that fluid is then drained out, and we hope that the egg is in there. Egg is obviously microscopic, so we can't see it unless the scientists see it. So it is invasive. It's going from vagina through into the kind of pelvis where the ovary is and into the ovary, and then we drain the fluid out. Hopefully we avoid the tube because we don't really want to cause any tubal damage, but it's invasive. A lot of people have it done under anesthetic, which is again an insult on the system if you are thinking about the exposure to volatiles. Some people use volatiles, some people just use midazolam and fentanyl. But if you aren't having anesthetic, it's also very uncomfortable for patients too. So the way I trained actually was using local anesthetic just in the vagina, which I now look back at and think, gosh, poor people who have to go through that. So it's a lot. And that's the woman's side of thing. Obviously, the man has to ejaculate into a device and we use that, but it's not exactly for him. He didn't have to be put to sleep for that process. So, I mean, the woman goes through a hell of a lot really to get this result. And the thing is that we never know exactly how many eggs they're going to be. Not every follicle will have an egg in it. So it can be it's really stressful as well, not knowing what your outcome is potentially going to be.
And IVF is skyrocketing. Every single year we're seeing it's becoming more and more and more popular. There are a lot of different theories, and there are conspiracy theories around this as well. What's your perspective on this? Like, what are the theories, science, or social factors that you see in the rise of IVF and how that reflects in the rise of infertility, which is a hot topic at the moment, isn't it?
Yes, and it's something I do get rather passionate and excited about talking about, and I think exposing some of the things that are of a concern in our world. There is definitely the fact that people are driven to do IVF for lots of reasons. And so from the negative side of things, yes, I think there is an idea of, IVF is a way of getting a baby. The marketing kind of doubles your chances. You're more likely, by doing this, let's avoid having natural conception. We also know that a lot of companies make money from IVF. And sadly, as a doctor, this is where ethics is quite difficult, is that, you have to have an income, and that is made through helping other people potentially get pregnant, but also big, huge private equity companies that run fertility units will also are gaining equity by putting people through IVF cycles. So that's where my negative point of view comes from, because that's what is their business, their core business. So from that side of things, I find it really difficult at times. My aim is to really help build families, but not in a way that's going to hinder them financially. On the flip side, the rise of IVF is probably more the fact that we are aging as a fertility population. And that's because from a wonderful feministic point of view, a lot of women are out there living their life, building their careers, focusing on what they want to be doing. And the thought of family doesn't really come into the picture till later on. And also trying to find the perfect person doesn't always come into the picture, if ever, for a lot of people. And so a lot of my patients come to me at like 38 and said, well, I've been looking for this perfect person to start a family with, and I haven't found them. Is it too late? And thank goodness, a lot of the time it's not too late. But it's hard because you don't really want to have to admit that to yourself. And then the guilt that comes along with it, thinking, oh, well, if only I'd done it earlier and all these sorts of things, is really, really, really hard. So I think that IVF is rising for two purposes. One is the negative financial gains by big companies, and the two is our age and our population, and also the fact that there's more women going to university, more women who are in careers that require a lot more study and a lot more time taken for themselves or for their career outside of having a baby.
And we're also seeing the rise of endocrine disorders like endometriosis and PCOS. I mean, you could argue endometriosis has always been static, but maybe we're just discovering it more in women because we have better diagnostic tools. But PCOS we know is increasing. And we also know about phthalates and everything else that's decreasing fertility. But I guess that's a whole other conversation. But I was
going to say that when you talk about endocrine disruptors, also realizing for male factor too, the drop in sperm counts has been shown to have a link with endocrine disrupting chemicals. And our overall sperm counts have been dropping over time. And this is something to do with our environment that we really also need to look at the male too.
And that beautifully goes into the next conversation, which was, can holistic living and can we be holistic and also have IVF and go through IVF cycles? Because these two things kind of in the zeitgeist of fertility and women's health seem to be on opposite ends of the scale, but I don't necessarily think that they have to be, especially if we have mothers who are starting their pregnancy journey and their motherhood journey later in life. We need to have the holistic supporting the more allopathic measures of fertility. And that's something that you're really passionate about, is this melding of these two worlds and using holistic living to support IVF. So can you speak a little bit more about that?
Yes, that you're speaking my language. That's one of the really big drivers behind what I do, is it allows that the body is an amazing meld of physiology, but also spirituality, and the combination of the two. And I feel really lucky that we've got IVF for those that really need it. But if we are creating an embryo to be put back into an environment that is hostile potentially for life creation, or that is not in its optimal state, then it's really useless. Like, I could make all the embryos in the world I liked, but if the body is not prepared to receive the embryo, then it's kind of useless. So they really need to go hand in hand at all points. Psychologically and physically, we need to be in the right state to be able to receive the embryo and receive the life to have the baby.
Yes, our life is not just an embryo. I think that's really poignant, especially in my extended family right now. I have a woman in my extended family, and I think she has been through, I don't know the exact number, but I think it's over 5 IVF cycles. And then they finally were like, maybe something is wrong here. And they found something that, they could have gotten to 2 IVF cycles and gone like, let's do a little bit of investigating. It makes no sense why your embryos aren't sticking. And she had something wrong with her uterus, and it was a very simple keyhole surgery. And I was just thinking, you guys have made hundreds of thousands of dollars off this poor couple. And now you've started to be more curious. And now you're going, oh, well, maybe you should take this supplement, and maybe we should do this surgery, and let's talk about your diet. And I just think it's really interesting with IVF doctors specifically, that very often what we hear is that that is not the conversation that happens at the outset. It's not, your ovaries take about 3 months to fully mature. Let's start now. Come back to me in 3 months. How about we look at your diet? How about we try and lose a little bit of weight? How about we try and put some muscle mass on? Let's talk about all the other determinants of health that really help to hold on to a pregnancy. Where is your progesterone at? I just think these are really interesting questions. But what we hear within the IVF realm is we're just going to go through another round and another round and another round. And it's just your body, and it's such a mystery. We don't know why it's sticking. But you're saying like, no, let's prepare the body, and then we can do IVF cycles. So if you had a client come to you and they were really keen to do an IVF cycle and their body was very obviously ready, would you say, you're not ready yet? Come back to me in 3 months after you put these things in place? Like, what does that look like if you are pretty sure that someone's not going to carry that pregnancy to term, and that might actually have risks?
It's a really difficult place to be, because some people aren't ready to listen or hear that information. And a lot of the time, there's a lot of panic, a lot of stress associated with trying to get pregnant. They don't come to me because they're having a great time. They come to me because they're struggling already. And so often they don't want to hear when I say we need to prepare things. And often they have to go through a cycle that hasn't worked for them to listen to what I say. That doesn't mean that I don't say it on the outset. I will talk to them all about the things that are important, and going through what it is to actually create a life inside of you. But 3 months for a lot of people seems like eternity. But I wish people would really listen to be like, I always say, come and see me 3 months before you want to have the baby. And that's actually what I try a lot to talk to GPs about, is actually sending the patients to me before they've been trying for a year. Send them to me after 6 months or 3 months even, because I can then help them prepare that time. I'll say, hey, look, I'd love to see you before you actually are desperate at the other end. I'd love to see you with that lead-in time to be, hey, let's look at everything. Let's look at your diet. Let's look at your stress levels. Let's look at your hormones and all the things you've mentioned already. Those things are so important. And I can do all the physiological kind of the doctor speak checks, but then I like to have a supportive network. I like to have a lot of other practitioners around me that they can help me do this alongside them. And if they can engage earlier on, it's much better than going backwards. It's like the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. I prefer not to need the ambulance. I prefer to and not to jump off the cliff either. I ideally will say to someone, look, I think we need to focus on egg quality here. If that's usually the thing that we need the 3 months for. And I'll say, look, these are things we need to do for egg quality. How would you feel about delaying the timing starting? And what if we do X, Y, and Z, try a few other things? We can support your natural cycle while you're doing it. You can still try naturally while we are supporting your egg quality, but let's avoid the more invasive IVF until we've made some other changes in the lifestyle. So some patients are receptive to that, but most of them just wanted to be pregnant yesterday, which is hard.
My neck hurts from nodding. I'm nodding so much.
Yeah.
You brought up AMH. Let's talk about it. What is AMH? What does this actually tell us about fertility? Because a lot of women go and get this test and just think it is a death sentence or it's a be all and end all. Can it change? What's the optimal level? What does it actually represent?
So AMH is something that as a fertility specialist, I use every day for multiple reasons, but it doesn't mean that every doctor needs to use it for multiple reasons. So what is AMH? Anti-Müllerian hormone. It is a marker of ovarian reserve, but it's not a marker of fertility. It doesn't tell me that if there were 3 Sarahs in front of me, one had a low AMH, one had a normal one, and one had a high AMH, and everything else is the same, you will all have the same monthly ability to conceive. So your fecundity per month is the same. But the person with the low AMH is going to struggle if they need to do IVF. They're also likely to lose their egg reserve faster. Where on the flip side, the person with a very high AMH is more likely to potentially over-respond, is more likely to have conditions such as polycystic ovary syndrome. And so there's another whole raft of things that that person may have. So I use it for sort of in a 2 to 3 prong approach. One, it helps me with diagnoses. So if it's a very low AMH, I think, well, is there something else going on that's affecting the ovaries? Is there a process within the ovary, be it endometriosis for one, that is causing sort of resistance in the ovary? Has there been some exposure to something in the environment that has meant that their reserve is lower than expected for their age? If it's very high, it's the opposite. It's that PCO picture. Has the person isn't releasing their eggs on a regular basis? AMH's job is to hold eggs in place. So the higher it is, the harder it is for the body to release the eggs. And then if the person's in the middle, it kind of gives me another whole realm of discussion saying, well, maybe you don't need to go down that treatment path option. It also helps me decide what level of drug I'm going to give you for the safest possible approach, and also how many potential rounds of IVF you might need if you need IVF. For egg freezing, I use it a lot to say maybe you don't need to freeze your eggs. Maybe you do. And if you do, what's it going to look like and how much is that going to cost you? So I do find it helpful for people for planning, especially on all levels. But it is not a death sentence and it's not a guarantee of pregnancy. And it doesn't tell me anything about quality. Quality is mainly determined by age and the environment that those eggs are in. As we've already kind of mentioned, it's the house that they are living in and have lived in their whole entire existence, or your whole entire existence on this planet.
And so you spoke about egg freezing just a second there, and I'd like to hold on to that. So if a woman comes to you and they have low AMH, so say if I came to you and I have PCOS or I have endometriosis and I want to have kids in maybe 5 years, but I'm not ready yet, and my AMH is low, would you say, yes, you probably need to freeze your eggs now? What would that look like?
Yes, I usually would. If your AMH is low, say you came to me and you were 30 years old, 28, 30 years old, and your AMH was sort of 11, 12, I'm going to say, well, the chances are that your AMH is going to be lower in 5 years' time when you come to see me. And if you are going to be 35, the DNA within your eggs is going to be a lower quality as we age. So at 35, you're going to have a lower level and you're going to have a lower quality. So if you needed to have assistance at 35, you're going to need more eggs, which with a lower AMH, you're going to need more cycles than you would have needed now. So you potentially, like 2 eggs now would potentially be like 4 eggs later on. So, you know, one to two really. So if you're 30 years old and you're getting 1 egg, that's the same as having sort of maybe 2 or 3 eggs at 35. Just a rough idea. This is obviously very different per person. But the point I'm trying to make here is more that you need less at a younger person than you do as an older person. So if you've got a low AMH, you're better off to do the process younger than you are to get into trouble later on if that's something that you really want. Of course, we have to remember that egg freezing isn't guaranteed. The best egg freezing is for patients is ones that don't actually need it, because they then get pregnant naturally, and it makes me very happy that way. So, but what I do find it really helpful for people is it allows people to stop being so concerned about trying to find the perfect person and to have children with, whether or not that's a guy, a girl, whatever it's going to be. It gives you the opportunities to finish your career, advance your career, travel, and find the person that you really want to have a family with. Or if you decide to head on your own, you've still got that option available to you later on down the track.
Okay. Recently, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, France has sent out letters to all 29-year-olds to tell them to freeze their eggs.
Yes, I know.
What is your take on this abomination of trying to scare women into having babies and freezing their eggs? You just said it's not a guarantee. So what is your opinion on this? What's your take on this?
Well, I think it's pretty harsh. I personally don't think that I would subscribe to that. And I feel really disappointed on a personal level for the women of France being told this, because it's not, AMH is not an indication of your fertility. So we don't exactly know if you had a low level and you're told you need to freeze your eggs tomorrow. Freezing your eggs is not guaranteed it's going to work for pregnancy. I don't know much about the French market for IVF and the financial side of things and the government side of things and what's going on there either, to really make a comment around what the economic costs would be. But the physical costs are huge, because IVF is not without risks. You've got a huge high levels of hormones. You've got to undergo a procedure to take them out, which has got risks of, potentially damaging blood vessels, causing bleeding, causing infection, causing pain, overstimulation. You could be in ICU. There are all these things that could be negative. It's not taking a Panadol and, going for a walk. There are things that are high risk. And I think it's terrible also for a woman to feel like you have to freeze your eggs, otherwise you're going to be barren in the future. And I don't know, maybe it's the government is trying to stop aging processes. I found it really difficult as a female, a mother of females, to think that a government would put that in place. And that's just really my personal opinion. It makes me really sad. France does a lot of really good things for health, but this is probably not one of them.
It's incredibly archaic. And it is something that we're seeing a lot, is that we have mostly men in governments and they're going, oh, birth rate is falling. This isn't good for the economy. Let's just try and coerce women into having more babies. And this is just another example of that I think we're going to keep seeing in the next few years, as fertility is a main concern of most governments. But going back to the individual, and if women are wanting to improve their fertility outcomes, the best thing they can do is improve their egg quality. And so AMH is out the window. That's not really a great indication. That's just a biomarker that tells IVF doctors what they can and cannot do. What does egg quality respond to? What are some things that you would recommend to your clients when they come to you to improve their egg quality? And how do you quantify that as an IVF doctor?
Egg quality, we have to remember, going back to basics, that the eggs were in your body when you were in utero inside your mother's tummy. And as we go through life, we're not getting new eggs. They're just, we're just losing eggs throughout our life. So if you're thinking that we can't kind of make them better, but what we can do is reduce the toxic load on the system to help repair any DNA breaks or any DNA concerns that might result in egg breakdown or genetic abnormalities in the offspring. So the way I look at it, I think, well, if you're overloading the system with toxins, the body is going to spend its time detoxifying to maintain homeostasis, that's a level physiology from the heart and the brain and the liver, all those other kind of life essential things. Reproduction is not considered in the life essential things, so it's kind of goes off the back burner. So, if your mitochondria are not functioning so well, but they're busy doing other things to provide energy in other parts of the body, the ovaries miss out. And so if our liver is trying to process all the chemicals in our system, the pollutants, everything from the foods that we're eating to the air that we're breathing to the hair dye that we're using, our makeup, the list goes on without scaring people, then it can't function on trying to protect that egg. The egg and its energy system is so important for fertility because it actually helps the sperm to fertilize. So the sperm don't have as robust energy systems within them, and they rely heavily on the egg's ability to create energy and help it with its job to fertilize or to implant into the egg. And so again, if that egg is not working, then if the sperm's a little bit dodgy as well, you've got a compounding problem. So if I look at it if you think that is the problem, what do I say to patients to fix the problem? So I go back to the lifestyle again and I say, well, what are the endocrine disruptors in your life? What are you doing? What products are you putting on your skin? What are you doing with your hair? What are you doing with your nails? What are you doing with the clothing that you wear? I'm usually a bit careful about how I broach this topic. It's not usually the first thing I'll say to somebody, because often the patients or people who are going through this journey are already highly stressed and have so many other little voices in their head going, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that. And so I don't want to overwhelm them too much, but I start off with simple things like, say, don't heat your food up in plastic containers. So that leaches the plastics out of them. When you heat them up, the plastic molecules will go into your food. The same with using Glad wrap, drinking out of plastic bottles, especially the one that sits in your car that's had the heat of the sun on it all day, that's leached its plastic out into the water that you then drink. Same with coffee cups. Anything that's heated with the plastic has an opportunity for those molecules to separate, release some toxin, and then reform again. The swapping out of chemicals within your environment. So I don't say go throw everything out of your house because it's very expensive and also environmentally poor, just to fill the environment full of toxic waste. So I say when you finish one thing, make a better choice the next time. So thinking about your cleaning products, go back to more natural products that you can use. Face products, don't have things that have lots of numbers that you don't understand at the back of them. And the worst one, I think, is one that says perfume. And I don't know anything called perfume. Perfume is a description of a smell. It doesn't say anything. So companies can get away with saying the word perfume, and it can have anything in it that they like. So that's something I'm really do get a bit concerned about for people, because it's known that some of those perfume compounds can affect the endocrine, or potentially affect the endocrine system. So it's making better choices. And if for people who really, I don't want to say everyone don't ever do your nails ever again, we'll say, well, don't do them as regularly. So maybe just do your toes and leave your toes for a bit. And so you don't want to become a cave woman or a cave person. You also need to live life a little. And so you don't want to be totally devoid of any of those nicer things that you might like. The same with alcohol. I say to people, celebration drinks are really important. Rating is really important. And if having a glass of wine means you're not avoiding a celebration event, then that's also important, because you don't know how long this journey is going to be. If it's 10 years for you and you've spent 10 years avoiding going to anything social because you don't want to be having one glass of wine, it's probably a lot worse. The letdown of the fact that these cycles aren't working for you. That's another thing. Environment aside, what are the things that you can take? Obviously, I'm not a naturopath. I'm not a nutritionist. It's not something that my expertise, apart from having a strong interest in this area. But CoQ10 is something that I use a lot for patients. NAC, NAD are things that can be useful too. NAD, you've got to be careful. It has to be an infusion, not an oral supplement, because it doesn't actually have that good research about its oral availability. Vitamins, so high dose antioxidants, vitamin C, vitamin E, zinc, selenium can all be really helpful just to boost the system. I think, well, if we think oxidative stress, the breaking down of the DNA in the ovary or in the egg, is the problem. If we can counterbalance this by supporting the oxidation system, then there are things that can be really helpful for patients.
Thanks to this week's podcast sponsor, Tempdrop, for keeping this podcast free for you to listen to. If you are trying to conceive, whether through IVF or naturally, understanding exactly when ovulation happens can make the process feel far more informed and grounded. I personally use this little gizmo, Tempdrop. It's a wearable basal body temperature sensor that you wear on your upper arm while you sleep. It's continuously tracking overnight temperature patterns to confirm when ovulation has occurred. Ovulation typically shows up as a small temperature dip and then a sustained rise as progesterone increases. Tempdrop picks up this pattern, making it possible to identify exactly when your fertile window is opening and closing with accuracy. A 2025 clinical study analyzing 194 cycles found that this little gizmo, Tempdrop, identified ovulation within 96.8 and 98.6% overall accuracy. This demonstrates its reliability as an alternative to urine ovulation testing. Tempdrop uses low EMF Bluetooth and syncs up with an app where you can log cervical fluid, LH test symptoms, and all other cycle markers. This gives you a full view of your cycle in one place. Visit tempdrop.com.au and use my discount code AFARCWOMAN for 10% off. Okay, wonderful. Let's move on to IVF and IUI. What is IUI? And how does it compare to IVF? And which one will you usually recommend first? And when will you switch between the two?
So IUI stands for intrauterine insemination. So that is where we follow someone's cycle to the point where they're about to ovulate. We either give them medication to make them definitely have a follicle to ovulate and trigger that ovulation event to occur to time an insemination process. Insemination is where a male will give his sperm sample. The sperm is washed, so all the prostatic fluid and some of the other fluid that helps it get to the cervix is taken away, and it's just the pure sperm sample left. And that is then inseminated, little tiny catheter into the uterus via the vagina through the cervix. So it's a bit like having a smear. It's not done under anesthetic. It's a speculum in the vagina. The cervix is visualized. A little catheter is headed through the cervix, and the sperm is released there. And the idea is that it just gives the sperm a little bit of a head start to where it needs to go.
Like and that's, a little bit of a handicap.
Yeah. Exactly right. If we could give them little maps as well so they knew where they needed to go. But unfortunately, we can only do so much. So when would I use this process? So I use this process if a male has a sperm issue. So his sperm is not terrible, but it's also not great. Mainly motility is a big thing, or lower concentration. There's certain cutoffs that we have that I'd say, no, this is not going to be working for you. But generally, if it's just a small, kind of a mild male factor, then I'll use it for them. If it's someone who also can't have physical intercourse, it can be really useful. People who have vaginismus or any other reason why ejaculation inside the vagina is not a possibility, then this is also a really useful way of being a bit more natural in that process. Patients who don't want to undergo IVF, it's useful for. And also those patients who are doing really poorly at IVF, I'll also go back to IUI. If you're only making one egg at IVF and you're paying a ridiculous amount of money for it, I think that's a little bit hard. And so if you're only making one egg through that process, making one egg through IUI is also probably a lot of a better cost savings for not that much improved benefit. Yes, the success rates are a lot better with IVF, and it's also dependent on, of course, on the patient's age. You are wise probably between 10 to 15, 20% per cycle, whereas you're looking at a lot higher rate per embryo transfer depending on age and quality and things there. The advantage of IUI is that it doesn't involve taking those huge levels of injections and having this massive estrogen spikes, really. So it can be a lot more gentler on the body for a patient too. And the fertilization is still natural. It's not like we're doing it in the lab.
And do women prefer that because it feels a little bit more natural, and they usually will go for IUI first, and then if that doesn't work, will they move on to IVF if that doesn't work for them?
It really depends on the person and their mindset when they're coming into it. Those that really want to avoid IVF at all costs, want to keep things as natural as possible, yes, they'll do IUI first. Those that have sort of been trying for sometimes 6 to 12 months and have just been like, no, I'm just sick of having to wait each month, I'm finding it really hard, they'll just want to go straight for IVF. Because with IVF, we can make potentially the same amount of embryos you may have made in a whole entire year in 1 month. So it saves a lot of time for patients. And some people are just like, I'm over this. I just need to take that away from me, and I don't want to do that anymore. And I want to make sure I've definitely got the goods, and I've got the embryo, and the embryo is going where it needs to go. So there's still unknowns with an IUI process. So all we know about is that we've put the sperm in the right place at the right time. We don't know if it's managed to fertilize. We don't know if it's managed to travel down the tube and develop, or we haven't. So there's still things that we have that are unknown. So I think IVF for some people is what they really want to do. Get to the
Yes, and because fertility is such an individuated process, I guess it's really hard to compare the success rates between IUI and IVF. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, and you've also got to remember each month it's also going to be different for every patient, because every month you've got a new egg and every month you've got a new sperm. So it's hard almost to compare cycle to cycle too, because in 1 month you might have had a really bad viral illness which may have affected your sperm quality and your sperm count. The same with your eggs. There's lots of things that we can't always control for, so it is hard to compare between the two of them. But general guidelines would suggest that a patient who's sort of under 35 years old, good prognosis, 3 IUIs, if it's not working, I may let them go to 6, but I'd be saying, let's just kind of think about shifting and changing now. Someone who's older than 35, I'd be at that 3 IUIs, be saying, now let's move on, because I really want to get, if they're going to need IVF, I want to do it before the AMH drops any further and it becomes even harder. So you kind of, sometimes I'll go IVF first and then say I can come back to IUI if it's not working, because I want to utilize your egg quality and get as much as I can out earlier rather than later.
So on that, what can we do and what would you recommend to women to have a successful IVF or IUI round? Is it kind of the things that you said previously, prepare the body to become a really beautiful host for pregnancy and become calm? But like, what are some specific things that you feel like you repeat a lot to your clients before they have their rounds?
So to prepare for IVF, it's really important to have nourished yourself physically and mentally and your relationship too. So I like people to have thought about these things. And so nutritionally, Mediterranean diet is probably the best diet. I say eat the rainbow. So eating all the colors, colorful foods that are natural colors, not artificial colors, of course, are high in antioxidants in many cases. And they're going to be really helpful naturally because nutrients, the way that we process it is the way that it was grown in nature. So taking all the supplements in the world is actually not as good as eating the food with the raw ingredients because there's so many other things other than just the essential vitamin or mineral. It's the whole package of the food. So whole foods is really important. Movement, regular exercise, not over exercising, but keeping yourself moving, allowing sort of lymphatic drainage and lymphatic flow is really good. Sleep is an interesting one. So a study just recently came out showing that the amount of sleep and the type of quality of sleep doesn't affect embryo transfer, but we know that sleeping affects melatonin levels. And melatonin is an antioxidant also. And having a good amount of sleep allows you to be more resilient to go through the process too. It helps reduce the cortisol and stress responses in your body. So it allows you to also detoxify your system and reset. So I think sleeping is really important. The toxins we've already spoken about. So reducing, obviously, stop smoking, vaping, another big one, high alcohol intake, excessive plastics, endocrine disruptors, all those things really important to get out of your system. And also for those patients or those people who have jobs that are highly toxic environments, farmers, exposure to different chemicals, that's also a consideration for people. I think it's important to check all your other endocrine systems as well. Make sure your iron levels, B12, folate, vitamin D is good. Should be on a good prenatal. Folic acid is very important for fertility, so we need to make sure we've got the right folate for you. And a lot of places are iodine deficient, so making sure you've got a good supplement for your iodine as well.
Looking at the entire body and the entire spirit of that woman and see if she's actually ready and has like an abundance of nutrients to support that pregnancy. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's that supporting the pregnancy physically and also psychologically, because if you are going down the process of IVF, for most people, it's not just easy one round and done. You've got to have the resilience to be able to keep going if that's what you need and that's what you desire. But your relationship also has to have that. So I talk to people about in a relationship, you have the man and the woman, and then you've got the fertility. Taking away the thought that fertility is not who you are. Fertility is something about the two of you coming together. No one person should be blaming themselves for this process. It is if you can depersonalize it and take it outside of yourselves, then you've got a lot less stress upon each other and you don't get the blame of it's your fault, it's my fault, you're doing this and I'm doing this and you're not doing that. That doesn't help anybody because you're in this situation because you want to start a family together. Going back to why are you here in the first place and not losing sight of that. And if it doesn't work, what have you got at the end of the day? You've still got each other. And so having each other and having quality with each other is important. So sometimes I tell people to stop doing IVF for a bit and just have some time out together. Go on a holiday. Look after yourselves.
Absolutely. So going on from that, if you could speak to male partners or partners, not even male partners, partners to women who are going through an IVF journey, or even people who are non-binary going through an IVF journey. Anyone who's going through an IVF journey, they're partners. We're speaking to you. What would you say to them? Like, let's separate this maybe. Maybe you can speak to the male partners who are supporting their sperm quality. What would you say to them? And we'll talk to all partners and what they can do to support a woman going through this.
Perfect. So from a sperm quality, this is another topic that I love to talk about. But to improve your sperm quality, look at your lifestyle again. Look at your exercise and how much you are drinking, how much you are eating. Are you smoking? All those other things we've spoken about. The supports you can have is if you've got sperm issues, we look at vitamin C, vitamin D, again, zinc, selenium are the really big ones. Frequent ejaculation if there's a issue, because the longer the sperm is sitting around in the epididymis before it gets to ejaculate, the risk of it having sort of micro breaks or DNA fragmentation increases slightly. So if you've got a sperm issue, then you need to get those dodgy sperm out before we think about doing IVF. So looking at your own whole self, a funny thing that I sort of say to patients is, If you are a big cyclist, be careful. Sitting down on your bike for too long increases your heat in your testicles and also puts a bit of pressure on the perineal area, which can make things worse. I've seen guys go having no sperm at all after doing long bike rides. So really look at what is it that's happening in that heated area, cell phones, or etc. in that testicle region. So for yourself, if you're a man and you're supporting an IVF cycle, don't forget that you also have a part to play. You need to be eating well. You need to be reducing toxic load on your system. You also need to de-stress, and you need to think about ejaculating before your IVF if that's what you're doing. If you are supporting the woman from a psychological point of view, be kind. Just be kind. The number of women I just see who are so stressed because their hormones are out the door. Their estrogen is the highest it's ever been. It's like having a whole year's worth of periods in one go. It's a lot that you're tolerating. You're going to cry at the puppy dog walking across the road. You're going to get angry at the fact that the toothpaste is sitting on the left side, not the right side. There are things that you are just not going to be able to tolerate for whatever reason. And it's actually the hormones speaking here. And so be kind, be tolerant, and be loving would be the big things I'd say. You're in this for the loving reason and the initiation. Remember that as you're going through this process.
Yes. Beautiful. Let's talk a little bit more, I would say, about like special situations and like identity around IVF and queer identity around IVF. So like, what does IVF procedures and IUI procedures look like for queer couples? And like, are there any extra hoops that exist throughout legislation in Australia? Is there any loopholes for queer people? Is there any places in Australia that are not welcoming to queer couples as well? Like, what's the history of IUI and IVF for queer couples as well?
So for some states, it's really difficult. In some places, being a queer person undergoing fertility desires is really difficult, is hard. Typically speaking, Western Australia has been the hardest state, but I think things are changing, and it's hard to know because governments will change all the time about what their legislations are. But being a queer couple or person who doesn't have the other gamete, so a gamete, your egg or your sperm, you need to get it from somewhere else. So there are a lot more loopholes from that regard, is that you don't have the necessary things to make an embryo. So you need an egg, you need a sperm, and you need a uterus. So for guys, it can be a lot harder because not only do you have to find an egg donor, you also have to find a surrogate or a uterus to carry that in. And the legislation in Australia and some other parts of the world are the same. Say you can't actually advertise for a surrogate. It's illegal to do these things. And as a fertility specialist, I'm not allowed to help you do that either. So you have to find this person on your own. You also have to prove that you've developed this relationship with them. So it just takes time. In Australia, law also says, well, different states are a little bit different here, but in Victoria, where I practice, the law says that if you are the gestational carrier or the surrogate, you are actually the parent of that baby until it's born and 21 days after the fact. So you almost have to adopt your child back. And I mean, every state's a little bit different, and this may have changed depending on what the governments do, because the government does change these policies, but it's really tricky. So you need to have a good lawyer involved. And luckily we have some wonderful lawyers in Australia that support this process, because it's a very unique, a very specialized area. And there's a lot of people working really hard at the moment to reduce some of these barriers for people. But surrogacy and traditionally here has been hard. And I do have a lot of patients who end up traveling overseas to reduce some of the stress and the burden of this process, which is hard in itself. But back to queer couples. So if you're a female and needing sperm, it's often a lot easier. And so people will either come to see me because they want to do it through the channels of an either known donor, they know somebody that wants to come and help them, or they want to go into a sperm bank or utilize a sperm bank to go through the process. If the sperm donor has lots of sperm, we can consider IUI, which we've already talked about, and that can be a lot more cost-effective, less invasive for the person. Or if the person's got less sperm, we can do IVF and make embryos. Some people also like to use one person's egg, the donor sperm, and then put their egg back into the other person in the relationship's uterus. And so then it's kind of like a shared situation. That can be really a beautiful way of doing it for a lot of people. Again, the state's laws and legislation has different rules around the counselling that's needed for this process, the consent forms, and mainly the consent around this process is really quite strict, and every state will be different. I think it's really important that for IVF specialists to realize that a lot of people who choose to either parent alone, have a partner of the same sex, the only way they can get pregnant is by the assistance of a fertility team. And so I take that honour on really, really carefully, because these people ideally wouldn't want to have to go undergo IVF, but they have to, or they have to go undergo IUI because they cannot do it on their own. So I think it's really important that we as a specialty are so inclusive and so caring for this really important group of our community, to try to help people have families in all different ways, shapes and forms. And so I really take this part of my job really seriously, and I have some beautiful couples that I look after, and the journey is long, a lot longer than those that just have the essential egg and sperm already. So my heart goes out to them, and I'm saying, keep going if you're doing it. It's hard.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm also thinking about it, same-sex women couples as well. They are the most likely to have the least amount of money out of couples. And it's also going to cost them more money to have a family. And they also have all this legislation they have to get through. And then male couples in Australia, at least, they will probably have to go overseas to do this because we are so strict. And I guess there are some benefits that protect surrogates in Australia for that. And I think that's good in some parts, but I can't help but think that some of these legislations are just homophobic and queerphobic and just not really kind to those groups of people. So grateful that we have IVF doctors like you who take it really seriously and use this very carefully, and know that this is a really important space for these people that probably have been saving up and thinking about this their entire lives if they wanted to have kids, because this is such a huge decision for them, especially. Moving on from that, I wanted to talk a little bit about PCOS and endometriosis. What does PCOS and endometriosis look like in your clinic with IVF and IUI? Let's just start with PCOS. What does that look like in your clinic? How does that present, and what does that journey look like? And I know it's incredibly variable.
So PCOS is this is like a rather large question, rather large answer. So PCOS is often an ovulatory dysfunction. That means that people are not ovulating every month. And without going into all the details, because we could do a whole entire podcast on PCOS itself, from a fertility perspective, what do? Well, I want to help the woman ovulate. To help the woman ovulate, we've talked about holistic things, really important. A lot of women can do things within their own environment to help reduce some of the things that are creating the ovarian issues, the resistance in the ovary. But if they can't, the treatments that I use is ovulation induction. So first of all, I would use a medication called letrozole, which is a tablet you take for 5 days. You then do a scan, maybe 2 scans, to see if your follicle is growing in your ovary. And then we would trigger that follicle to be released and tell you when to go have sex. So that's sort of like an ovulation induction cycle. And having monitoring, it's really important because we don't want to make sure you're overstimulating. We don't want to give you twins. Some people would love to have twins, but twins is really not a great thing to get from fertility treatments. Comes with a whole lot of risks. So we monitor people for that reason. And it also, if someone's doing really well on a ovulation induction cycle monitored, I'll sometimes say, well, let's go to it unmonitored. Go in and see if, so you don't have to utilize us. And so a really common time I do this is around Christmas. So people who have had a few monitored cycles leading up to Christmas, then I say, well, just go take the medication for yourself over the Christmas break and have a bit of autonomy over your journey. And so it allows people to have a bit of space, a bit of time without having to come and see me so regularly. With PCOS, they typically are patients who have a higher AMH. That higher AMH means that they're likely to respond quite significantly to the medications FSH that we talked about already. And their risk is something called ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. So we have to be really careful how we dose the drugs in these patients and how we monitor them throughout the process. So there are lots of different strategies that different specialists will use to try to minimize this risk, but it's really important that this is addressed before a patient starts the treatment. They understand that they are likely to need what's called a freeze-all cycle, to freeze all the embryos, let the body's hormones settle before we end up going into putting an embryo back in the body. Because if you think about it, if we are stimulating all these follicles to grow, that amount of estrogen that's growing, that's being released every cycle is huge. The lining of the uterus wasn't designed to have that higher level of estrogen in it. And we don't really know what that impact is on the embryo. The thoughts are it's not good, but in terms of embryo implantation and the window of implantation. So there is definitely a shift and a move to consider freeze-all cycles, especially for patients who have high estrogen levels. And so that would be sort of my strategy for these patients. But generally speaking, ovulation induction would be my first line. And I would really hope they don't need to get to IVF. But if they do, they'll often get a good number of eggs. Unfortunately, with that high number of eggs, it doesn't always mean a high number of embryos, which is disappointing. So you might have a patient who gets 22 eggs, but of those, maybe only half of them were mature, and you may still end up with a low embryo number. And again, that's probably to do with the metabolic issues, the metabolic health that is associated with PCOS.
Okay, thank you for explaining that. And moving on to endometriosis, what does that usually look like? I think the question that a lot of women with endometriosis have is, do I do a laparoscopy before? Do I do it after? Should I sort out everything to do with my endo leading up to this? Because we are seeing a lot of women who have endometriosis are entering IVF and IUI clinics to help with infertility. So what does that look like? Again, very open-ended question that can be very hard to answer.
This is actually a question that I come across all the time. And it is a discussion, again, realizing that as a fertility specialist, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to talk to you about the options and help guide you and help you understand why I'm coming to these decisions, and also advise you what I think you should do. But at the end of the day, it is your choice a lot of the time. So what do I say to patients with endometriosis? The concern about endometriosis is that often these patients have a lower AMH. Their system's highly inflammatory already. And even though IVF is shown to have a significant increase in your chances of successful pregnancy, it is still harder. Patients with endometriosis often will struggle even with IVF. So when to do a laparoscopy, when not to do a laparoscopy, that is the $1 million question. And it will also, for me, I decide around the AMH level, the age of the patient, and sort of their family desires. Because if they've got a low AMH, I'm going to really want to get on and do some embryo creating before things get even lower. If it's sort of a medium AMH, I'd say, well, you might be able to do a few cycles of IUI potentially to keep trying naturally, or do a laparoscopy, clear out any endo, try for 6 months, and then if it's not working, then move on to IVF. The research shows that for those that have either stage 1 or stage 2 endometriosis, that a laparoscopy may improve natural fertility outcomes for the 6 months after the laparoscopy. But it doesn't improve IVF outcomes. So if you're going to go down the IVF route already, there's no point in doing the laparoscopy then. The caveat of that is that if a patient has significant pain or is struggling for whatever reason, then a laparoscopy may be of benefit for the patient at that time. The other time I do a laparoscopy is that if they're having lots of failed embryo transfers, and I think, is there too much inflammation in the pelvis? Is there something we can't overcome by all the other things we've spoken about to reduce inflammation? Do they need me to go in there and clear out any of the inflammatory tissue, or as much as I can, to help improve their outcomes? And not only in terms of stimulation, but also in terms of embryo receptivity. I discussed this with patients earlier on to say, well, what are we going to do? Are we going to do the laparoscopy now, or be something we might consider in the future? And the really reason why I do this a lot is that there's so much guilt that goes involved in the decision making that people have through the IVF cycle. If we put the options on the table to start with, at least people know where they could be going, what their directions might be. Helps reduce that anxiety, helps to kind of let them understand where I'm coming from, and also helps them plan for their, financially and physically for the next 6 to 12 months. So a laparoscopy is useful only if it's low-grade endo and they wanted to try naturally. If it's significant, like stage 3, stage 4 endo, we only do it for pain. It doesn't improve fertility outcomes by doing a laparoscopy prior to IVF or natural conception. So we'd be mainly doing that just for pain. Endometriomas is another really big one. So if a patient has huge ovarian cysts that look like they are endometriosis related, then there's a big question about whether or not we should remove them or not. Obviously, removing them is going to reduce their AMH, so I decide that based on what the AMH level would be. But removing them can be useful if patients have undergone IVF cycles and they're not really stimulating that well. Just being aware that if you do an IVF cycle with endometriomas, there's a little bit more of a higher risk of infection.
But I guess women with endometriosis have to also think that endometrial tissue is sticking different organ systems and fascia together. And so that's going to make the experience of pregnancy very uncomfortable. So even if it doesn't improve the outcomes of IVF, I can imagine that women would probably still, with those very exaggerated stages, your 4 and 5 of endometriosis are very, very extreme, they probably might still opt for laparoscopy and then go for IVF just to manage pain. Is that kind of what you usually see, that even though it doesn't improve fertility outcomes, they might still opt for it?
Interestingly, it's a really good logical thought, but actually from an obstetric point of view, we don't often see patients having that huge response in the pregnancy. The worst one is actually fibroids. So we often see patients who have fibroids who start to degenerate in pregnancy. That can cause quite a lot of pain. If someone's got a pain syndrome, it's a different story. So if they've already got the pain syndrome, yes, that can be worsened sometimes in the pregnancy depending on the hormone levels. But actually those with if you're pregnant and you've got stage 4 endo, it doesn't actually get significantly worse in terms of pain in the actual pregnancy itself. So I wouldn't be advocating for surgery just to reduce potential pain in pregnancy. I'd be advocating for surgery for pain right now because we don't know how long it's going to be until you end up getting pregnant. And if you're having significant issues now, if it's 6 months down the track, a year down the track, but we want to make sure you're not going through that much pain, because the more pain you're in, the more your nerves are getting activated and the more you're likely to have a chronic pain syndrome later on in life.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you for answering that so beautifully. I just wanted to close up with a few myths and perhaps truths around the risks of IVF. So when you look on holistic Reddit threads and, different Facebook groups, in holistic mama groups, I've done my research before this, there's so many myths, there's so much misunderstanding around what IVF actually does. So does IVF increase the rate of cancer development in mother and baby? Is the first one that I'd like to ask you.
No, not directly in itself. So the answer is no. And when we can move on, there's been a lot of research in this area. And yes, there are some studies that show maybe there's a little correlation, but often that's because the patient that's going in for the fertility reason is different. And then maybe they had the cancer risk already. And so the answer's on a population level. No.
Mm-hmm. And I guess the question following that is, do IVF babies face any higher long-term health risks in association with children who are naturally conceived?
The answer here again is unlikely. It's not completely not true. Again, the reason why the patient might have been undergoing fertility in the first place may affect the outcome. So if it's a male factor, for instance, that could be to do with a genetic problem, that child may also have a genetic issue. What we don't know is we don't know about testing of the embryos. Is there some sort of long-term effect of taking a few cells away from an embryo and sending them away for genetic testing, which we didn't talk about today, but there's a thought that maybe there's some impact in the future, but we still don't know. Is probably the answer to that. But there's no risk of increasing childhood cancers or anything else that we know of from IVF at this stage.
So the next question that I think a lot of people are like, okay, this has to be true because it's so plausible. And there are a few different types of IVF that we actually haven't spoken about. There is one type of IVF where you put the ovum and the sperm in the petri dish, you leave for the night, you come back and you see if an embryo is there. And there is a second type where we put the ovum in a petri dish and you get a tiny little needle, the tiniest needle on earth, and you put the sperm inside of the egg. And so this type of IVF, what is that one called? What's the name of that when we get the needle and put the sperm inside of the ovum?
It's called ICSI, intracytoplasmic sperm injection. And we actually use a robot. It's very cool watching it. It's like this little wee robot on this desk, and it's micro movements to one pipette holds the egg and the other one will help put the sperm into it. So it's very exciting.
Okay, so there's a lot of conspiracy around this because we're forcing this to happen. This means that because the ovum has this kind of shield around it in a way and it chooses the sperm, and because the ovum isn't choosing the sperm, this might increase the risk of genetic mutations because the ovum didn't choose the correct sperm. Can you please talk about this and like what the likelihood of a baby being born from ICSI has an increased likelihood of having genetic mutations?
So we have to be clear that just by putting a sperm into an egg doesn't mean it's fertilized. So the fertilization still has to occur. So you're actually just enhancing the natural potential system. Yes, there's a potential that we're selecting the sperm that wasn't going to be the best sperm swimmer. But the reason why we do ICSI is because there aren't very many sperm to choose from. So the options are that you don't get pregnant because no sperm is going to get to that egg, or we inject it into the egg. A lot of the studies that sort of have shown slight changes with ICSI is actually because a lot of the concerning features around men who have problems with producing sperm may be genetic, and maybe that's the reason why the offspring are affected. But are we forcing it? No, we're not. We can't force the egg and the sperm to come together and fertilize. We really, really can't. If there's going to be a problem with the genetic material, if aneuploidy, too many or too little chromosomes occurs, you've got no difference in rates of that with IVF or ICSI, because you're still going to end up with a miscarriage if that happens. And yes, you may have some subtle changes by doing the ICSI process, but really we can't make a baby occur. We can only sort of lead the horse to the water really, but we can't make the fertilization happen. So that would be my bottom line there, is to say no. I think that is actually a little bit too extreme, and that for patients who don't have sperm, this is the only way that they can conceive. And we're actually really helping enhance and support their journey. And I don't think that we are forcing genetic mutations to occur in offspring in the future.
So that practice of XC doesn't change the genes that we have already. And if that pregnancy happened, it would have the same genetic mutations if we had XC anyway. So thank you for that. And I guess the other one that I really want to talk about are IVF hormones used harmful or risky in the long or the short term for women?
So if we look at the level of hormones that we're using, so the FSH that we're using to stimulate short half-life doesn't stay in the body that long, not a concern. Estrogen is probably what a lot of people talk about. And estrogen is at high levels within the cycle. The cycle lasts for approximately 2 weeks, and the highest level of estrogen is around the couple of days before your egg collection, and it's only a couple of days. The level of estrogen and progesterone in a pregnancy is far higher, and it's lasting for the whole. So really, if you really broke it down to the nitty-gritty and the basics of physiology again, and not to be too pigeonholed with the IVF, if you compare it to the actual pregnancy, then no, it's no real difference. But yes, for a short period of time, you are having super high levels of estrogen. And maybe if you did an IVF cycle every month for 5 years, then maybe it is a problem because you're not being pregnant every month for 5 years. But there's no studies that have shown that there's clear harms from the fertility drugs. From a physical point of view, not to say that psychologically, I feel like a lot of women feel pretty crazy on that high level of hormone because they're not used to it. And when you're pregnant, there's a whole lot of other stuff going on as well. So, but no research shows that high level of hormone does have a long-term negative effect on women. But just a caveat to that, there are some conditions that have issues with estrogen and some of the clotting factor issues, migraines with aura, severe endometriosis, high BMI. These patients really require very specific adaptations of their protocols. So it's important that if you are doing IVF or fertility, you are talking to someone who understands those differences, that understands the intricacies of hormones, that understands that not every body is the same. It's not cookie cutter medicine, that they understand you and your couple and your situation. So I think, that's really another important point about kind of holistic, tailored care for IVF.
Yeah, like if someone already has a higher subset of estradiol, it's being aware that we're going to increase that again. And so how can we support your exit pathways, and how can we support your liver and your adrenals? Are you constipated? Okay, cool. We can't really do an IVF cycle until everything is ready to move out. What's your progesterone level? What can we support for that? I think it's just such an individuated process. Thank you so much for your time. How can people find you? It's very exciting. You've opened up your own independent IVF and IUI clinic now. Tell us all about it.
So super excited. We have a doctor-run and owned clinic, so it's fully supported by ourselves. We're called Stellar Fertility. So we're based in Melbourne, but we also have a lot of telehealth. So I look after patients all over Australia, and we also have a unit in Riverina, IVF in New South Wales. So amazingly exciting. We are based in 2 beautiful renovated buildings in Fitzroy in central Melbourne, and that's where you can find me. Here physically or online. And I also do gynaecology, so I look after patients from adolescence all the way through to the menopausal time. Fertility is my main love and care. I operate twice a week, sometimes more, because I love to also look after every aspect of the woman. What else about me? You can contact me through my website, which I'm sure you can put in there. My Instagram, Dr. Rebecca MP, website's rebeccamp.com, and find me there. Shout out to me. Any questions, anything you want to know, do find us. Also at stellarfertility.com.au. We would love to help you on your journey if you need help. Also, if you don't need help, I'd also tell you that too. So be aware that if you come and see me, I'll give you a really honest and heartfelt approach to your care. So I look forward to meeting any of you out there.
And that's exactly what IVF needs. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day to listen to this episode. If you loved it, please remember to like, subscribe, and send to a loved one. If you want to learn more from ARC Women, please check out the website at arcwoman.com.au, where you can find a plethora of offerings like charts, masterclasses, courses, and organic clothing. You can also head over to patreon.com/arcwoman or substack.com/arcwoman to join the community. I hope you have a really beautiful morning, afternoon, or evening wherever you are in the world, and I will see you on the next episode.